Welcome to Bun and Games. My name is Alex, and we are in the potentially echoey halls of my living room, as I have not yet set up the studio in my new place. So for now, we may have to deal with whatever audio comes out of this recording. Today, I wanted to talk about the first time I ran any sort of tabletop RPG for kids. As a few weeks ago, my family was in town, and I ran a game for my two nieces and my dad. So firstly, the big thing I had to do was find what game I wanted to run for them. And it's the kind of thing where last summer I sort of got them into mini painting, and then, this summer I was like, I'm gonna now corrupt them into playing tabletop RPGs. And they are aware of actual plays. The younger niece is into D&D to some extent, but I knew I didn't want to run, D&D 5e for them. Both, they are just on the young side of that maybe being too complicated. We didn't have that much time. I don't really want to run that, and I would like to show them other games that are out there. So 5e was off the table right away. Even though at the D&D club at their school, which they told me about, the kids there might be like, you didn't play real D&D. So I might turn them into hipsters that get bullied, but hopefully not. Hopefully they can show the true way of other games that are out there to other young people. Neither of them are a part of it, but it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't really have enough time to actually show you guys how to play 5e, and I don't really want to run it, so we're not going to do that. We're going to choose something else. So I started looking at the other things I had. The first one, obviously, was maybe try and get them into DCC. However, looking at DCC, there's a bit more to it than I want to deal with. DCC is obviously very simple. It's not a hard game to get into. I was not going to do level zeros with them. I wanted, to give them more of a powered kind of game, since when they thought of D&D, they were thinking of stuff that they had probably seen, like whether they'd watched Critical Role or like Legends of Advantis or whatever it was they were watching. Because I do know one niece did watch actual plays. She couldn't tell me the name of what she watched, but she did say like, oh yeah, I watched this or that. So she obviously had an idea of what to expect. DCC is very fun, and I think it's really good for that, but I think for the time we had, I wanted something a little bit less chaotic. I wanted, something that had less tables and that kind of thing, where if we were doing a campaign, if it was a thing that we were doing on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or something, like that would be totally fine. But there's just enough to DCC where I was like, I don't really want to do this with them. So I think that's going to be off the table. And obviously, if I was going to do like wizard duels, I would cut those out because I don't play with those in my regular game. So there's obviously stuff I could have cut out. But if you're cutting out the fun, chaotic parts of DCC, why run DCC? And, I didn't want them to have the spellcasting be, super unsatisfying if they failed rolls or if they ended up doing things I didn't want them to do. So there's a lot of stuff there where it's like, I'm trying to get them interested. So as much as I know a lot of people might want to give their family members or their friends or whoever they're showing the hobby, like the OSR experience or this hardcore experience or whatever, hipster game you're playing, you want to show them that. I'm more there to give you sort of like a good first time in the hobby, and then we can get into the theory and everything else. Because honestly, nobody except for nerds who are into this stuff in like the really deep end care about that stuff. They just kind of want to play and have fun. So with that, DCC for me was off the table because I just thought there was a bit too much for me to have to deal with. So I thought, all right, I'm going to put that to the side for now. That might be another time when we have more time. Because we were going to be at a cabin and, there were a lot of other family activities and a lot of other things that, the rest of the family wanted to either do or prioritize or whatever. So I knew we weren't going to get a lot of time, even if the girls want to play a bunch. It was just not going to happen because everybody wanted to do other stuff and, that sort of thing. And like, you can't do a game for everybody there and have it be fun. So it's going to exclude certain members and that sort of thing. So the next on the list was Old School Essentials. And I think that would have been a pretty good choice, but as anybody who's been listening to me for a while, I'm just not really big on OSC. I think BX is fine. I think it's a fine, foundation for a lot of better stuff to come. I think there's a lot of good theory, a lot of, interesting things, but overall, OSC as it is kind of boring to me and does not really, spark any inspiration. So that was also off the table because I just didn't really feel like running that. Same with Merkborg, because Merkborg also has just the extra sort of, heavy metal kind of aspects to it, and it basically is just like BX or, just very simple D&D. So I was like, I'm not really going to do Merkborg either. I'm not really into that right now. It's not exactly, I think, the vibe I'm gonna sort of bring to my nieces, you know. The weird one out of left field, I was thinking, I was like, oh, maybe I'll try Cairn, you know, because Cairn's more narrative. It has, you know, some lighter stuff. And then I actually looked at Cairn. I ran Cairn for some friends, and there's enough weirdness where I was like, no. Cairn might have some good things where it's simple, and I think it probably honestly would be very good for kids because it does allow a lot of creativity. It does allow a lot of sort of fun narrative elements mixed with mechanics, but I did not want to get into it. I don't want to have to try and get my head around Cairn and also try and teach it. So that was off the table. What I ended up deciding on was Shadowdark. And there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, it's very simple, but the characters still get, you know, some cool flavor. They get some cool extra little abilities and talents and that sort of stuff. So there's enough where they're going to get the idea they have of D&D without all the rules and without being, you know, a little bit too much out there. And so that allowed that. Another aspect was that, and you know, you can add this to any system, but Shadowdark has a built-in, so I'm just going to give that bonus. But Shadowdark has a sort of turn system. You know, you go turn by turn, player to player. It's not just, all right, what do you guys want to do? And then everybody kind of just, you know, yells at you what they're trying to do. You go from turn to turn, and like everything's in initiative, whether in combat or outside of combat. And I think for kids, that's very good, because I have one niece who's extremely gregarious and very outgoing, and I have one niece who's much more quiet and will sort of take sort of the back seat if her sister is, you know, really taking charge. And I didn't want that too much because I want to make sure that they all had some good limelight. And I gotta say that turns really worked out well, because it went, all right, now it's more like a board game. It's your turn. All right, you want to do that? All right, so you do that. Give me the rolls. Okay, cool. That's what you find. This is what you do, whatever. All right, now you. And it worked out so well for the kids. They had a really great time. It was interesting to see because it felt like, I don't know if this is just from, you know, the creativity of kids, or if they were already primed from watching maybe some D&D related or fantasy related content. But the fact that they were already coming up with ideas of what they want to do with their characters and everything else was just so fun to see. One of my nieces was playing this cleric elf, and the other niece was playing a halfling thief, and my dad was playing a orc fighter. So we had some pretty classic, you know, looks. I guess the elf cleric is a little bit weird, but that was probably the weirdest one he had. Everybody else was, you know, pretty classic. Like, there's not a lot of crazy Shadowdark stuff unless you get like the extra books and that kind of thing. So overall, pretty classic stuff is what you're going to get. But one thing I found fun was that the halfling thief rolled for her background and she got cult initiate. And from that, her and her sister both worked on, okay, I'm a cleric. I have this sort of nature god I follow. How about we're like a fractured cult and you're my like one cultist, and like we are off on our own doing our own like cult shit. And it was really cool. They like, I did not add to that at all. That was them sort of fully together, coming up with stuff together, like as a group. And I thought that was so great. They roped in my father as, you know, the orc fighter, as like, we need more protection, more like martial fighting prowess. So we brought him along as a mercenary. And so a lot of it was just like, cool, this, honestly, you guys did better than a lot of adults I played with in terms of why you're a group, what you're doing, and, you know, what the whole deal is. And that went so smooth. And so basically what I had for the setting was they were in the city, and basically the city was once a much grander, richer, prosperous kind of city. But over time, from cataclysms and raiders and pirates and all kinds of different things, most of the city had been destroyed, and like there's like this sort of like last kind of stronghold. It was still, you know, doing well. It's kind of like seedy, you know, a bit like Lankmar, where it was, you know, once much grander, and now it's still big, still lots of money pouring through, still lots of people, still lots of things going on, but it is a shadow of its former self. And so I thought that'd be fun to have more of like this almost like post-apocalyptic urban kind of setting for them to sort of traipse through as they went out into the destroyed parts to go find, you know, treasure and other things. So that was kind of like the setting we had there for the one shot, where they went out to go find something. And essentially the story that we had was the cleric had found some sort of knowledge of this magic item that belonged to, you know, her god or something along those lines, that she was going to go off and go find, and brought the other two with her. And I won't go through the entire adventure we had, but I will go through some highlights that I thought were really fun. And honestly, the first encounter was, I think, the best part of the session. I used the Shadowdark encounters for this one because I just thought there were a lot of great ones just to sort of spark some ideas. And the one I saw was 3 goblins hitting each other with frying pans. I'm like, that's perfect. Goblins are such an easy, classic thing to, first show new players. And this is kind of a fun little weird situation that they find themselves in without being just, the generic classic, we're going to stop you on the road and rob you kind of thing. Which, no problem with that, no shade. I will probably still do that trope over and over again for the rest of my life. But, it's nice to have a little bit of change of pace, have a little bit of weird, dark humor. So what I had was when they got to the temple of the deity that they were looking for, just before they go in, they hear off to the right, there's the sounds of like clanging and laughter. And they go off and they find this camp. There's a dwarf tied up to a pole. There's, a campfire. And there's just these 3 goblins with frying pans laughing and just beating each other with the frying pans. And it was just this like really weird scene where everybody kind of just looked at each other and they didn't really know what to do. And so it was a really fun little RP moment between all of them in character being like, what the hell do we do here? Okay, I guess we'll kill them and then maybe we'll save this dwarf over here. So that's what they went for. And I gotta say, it was honestly kind of a brutal slaughter. They absolutely mercilessly murdered these goblins in basically no time at all, took them by surprise, and just got rid of them. But then they got to the dwarf. And the dwarf was like, if you let me go, I'll show you where my treasure is. I'm done with adventuring. Please just let me go. I want to go home. I want to go back to the city that, they're all from. Please just untie me. And they started negotiating with him. The cleric healed his wounds to show, like, hey, like, we're in good faith. The thief sort of searched him and found, like, in the seam of his pocket, there was, like, a little jewel that he had, sewn in, and they took that off of him. And they were basically, like, not totally sure about this guy. He was injured, but they were out here, and they'd already, encountered a lot of weird people and sort of, like, weird things, and, like, in the smoke of, like, the smoldering ruins, and, like, the shadows and that kind of stuff. So they were all very paranoid. And so they were all kind of deciding what to do with this guy. And it was really funny because my youngest niece and my dad were sort of going back and forth over and over. And, like, everybody was talking. And then there's this lull in the conversation where they're all kind of thinking about what to do. And in that silence, the older niece says, we should kill him. And I fucking burst out laughing. It was perfect comedic timing. It was just the most evil, sociopathic way to hear just, a young girl say just the most evil sounding thing. Like, it was like straight out of a horror movie the way it was said. It was so funny. And so they decided, they didn't kill him, but they decided that, you know what, we're not sure if we trust you. We don't know who you are. There's all kinds of weirdos out here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut your binds, but then the orc warrior is going to tie you up, and we're not going to walk you there. You're going to point in what direction the treasure is, and I'm going to drag you there. And so that's what they did. They dragged this poor dwarf like a few streets over, and then they found the treasure, which was just basically a bunch of, silverware and stuff that's worth things, but, isn't like a crazy bounty. Definitely worth the trouble that this whole situation was. And so because of that treatment, he didn't really have much of a choice, but as soon as they cut the dwarf, they were going to ask him more questions, but he just booked it out of there, and they're like, okay, we'll let him go. We have to go back to that temple. We have a mission that we're doing for our own reasons. Let's just move on. We got some good loot now. That was worth it. This is a weird place. So they go to the temple, and like I said, I'm not going to go through every part of this, but the temple is really fun for a few things, because we started kind of late, and, there was a bedtime that we had to, adhere to. So I try to make sure that, I'm not really a big fan of dungeons where there's just loads of rooms of nothing. I think I really learned that with the Temple of Elemental Evil actual play that I ran on the channel for Martin, where that was a really fun little, experiment. But it did make me realize, oh my god, other than the other issues with that, whole adventure, which I should do a video on at some point, but I think enough people have probably talked about the issues that, come into that with the later parts of that adventure. But there's just nothing really interesting about a bunch of empty rooms. I understand for the scale, but for the time that we had and just for the fun of, we only get a one shot here because I know we weren't going to get more sessions past the session 0 we had the night before and then the actual play session. So I want to make sure that there was a condensed amount of content in the different rooms they checked. So I had a bunch of different encounters. I had combat encounters, I had puzzles, I had traps, I had just some, interesting things that I thought they'd have fun with. As an example, I was sort of putting out little clues that there's something weird going on. Like there's this weird, like, corrupted pollen that they're finding, around, where it's like this nature god and their temple has been not only destroyed in one of the last raids from, either decades or centuries ago, but now it's being sort of like corrupted in a more new way. And I was sort of putting down those little things. I was trying to put like, little clues here and there for them, because I wanted to sort of put the cleric through some trials because I thought that'd be fun, but I also still wanted to have stuff for the thief and the warrior to do so that there was, a good amount of fun for everybody to, work together and have their own moments to shine, because I think that's the best way to get people to be really interested in hobbies, when they have those real good moments of like, oh, this is what RPGs are about. Okay, cool. I really enjoyed this. And I think one of the parts I really enjoyed was I knew my nieces loved cats, so I had this one section where there was this statue of the deity, and at the feet of the statue was this cat with a broken paw, and the cleric immediately cared for the cat, cast healing spells on the cat, and brought the cat back to a proper state. Still obviously malnourished and not in a super great state, but doing much, much better. And as a reward, they noticed that in the hand of the deity, this like radiant peach appeared. And I had that radiant peach initially for the cleric as just like, a good sort of, hey, you did a good job. Here's sort of trying to teach the game of like doing things outside the box or thinking about things in a different way than just, just going there to murder and steal will, really work for you in the game. I know there's a lot of things, like a lot of the design I did with this one shot would probably be criticized by certain people in the hobby, but when you're running it just for, your family, just for fun, a lot of theory can kind of be whatever. Doing things, I know, like in the OSR, it's like, don't make things specifically for characters, have characters just sort of, find whatever else. When I'm trying to get players who want to get into the hobby and feel special and feel cool and all that sort of stuff, I think doing that kind of stuff is a great way to show them what the hobby has to offer. But anyway, that peach was going to give them an extra 1d4 permanent hit points if they ate it. What was interesting, though, was that the cleric left it there because she was interested in it, but the thief picked it up immediately and bit into it, and I was just like describing how it was the most like delicious, juicy peach you've ever had in your life. You came from the slums of this terrible town. You haven't had a very good life. You've had probably lots of fruit, but none, come even close to this one. And what was great was the thief eating it was really useful because the thief rolled 2 on their hit points. So they only had 2 hit points. Everybody else had I think 7 or 8. So they were doing okay. They weren't in any trouble. But the thief, I was like, I don't want my niece to, go into combat and immediately go down and, be like, okay, I'm out of the combat. Like, I know that the cleric could bring them back up. That could lead to some tension and everything else. But I think, giving them at least one mulligan would be a little bit more fun. So she ate the peach and got more health, and I was like, perfect. Okay, now you're actually in the level of like, okay, if you get hit once, you might actually have a chance of surviving, which is what I like to see. I want to make sure they have some level of like, oh, this is dangerous. Let me react. Instead of just, oh, you got hit. Well, too bad, you're down now. So that was really, really useful. And so I described things like, the coins they found in one room having like a really old minting from like a past empire. I described how there were like axe wounds in the bones of some of these really old monks and like their robes being from a different era, showing like, oh, like whatever happened in this temple happened a while ago. And my main goal was just to try and set like an interesting tone and interesting sort of story in the background that they could, extrapolate from in any way they want to. it didn't really matter because it's just a one shot, but I wanted, just add that flavor of like, there is a history here. There is some stuff that's going on here. Some of it might help you, some of the clues, but overall, they had some pretty good times with that. But we were getting late, so we kind of sort of rushed through the last part. I want to do some faction play between some mushroom people and the other faction that's in the temple that have taken it over, which are like this sort of corrupt kind of cult, which I'll get into in a second. But we were running out of time, so they saw the mushroom cavern that had sort of burrowed down in one part of the temple, but they kind of ignored it, and they're like, okay, I think the treasure we're looking for must be down in the basement. Let's just go to the basement, and we're just going to go there. So that's what they did. Basically, what they met there in the basement were these corrupted elves who had these flowers sprouting out of their eyes. These really like corrupted dark flowers that were sort of pouring out like little bits of pollen here and there. It was quite, horrifying detail, but it was that interesting thing that I was going for because I knew my brother probably wouldn't be happy if in this game I described lots of, gore and bloody bits and that sort of thing. But I also didn't want to go full Looney Tunes with these sort of descriptions of them hitting different things. With the goblins, it's fine because they're goblins. So I think that kind of weird, dark humor kind of works. But I didn't want to do that with, everything that's in here. I wanted to try and keep the tone to a nice place of like sort of young horror, the way like where Goosebumps or maybe like Are You Afraid of the Dark, sort of like that sort of stuff where that lands. So what I ended up doing was I had these be sort of like a corrupted nature cult that had taken over the temple. They had these stems coming out of their necks right in the back, like right like where like the spine meets like the base of the head, sort of attached like this mother flower kind of thing. And basically when they attacked them, they were like slitting their bellies or stabbing into their chests or, trying to cut their heads off, and just pollen would fly out of their bodies, out of the open wounds, sort of fill the air, make it really cloudy and hard to see. They were choking on it, and it was like obviously very like potent and evil and all kinds of stuff where it's like, oh, this is like some sort of really bad miasmic kind of pollen coming out of these people. And in a weird way, while being less explicitly gory, less, full R-rated, it made it almost more horrifying. I was actually really impressed. It's probably one of my happier, kind of more proud moments of like, oh, I made this to be a little bit more PG, but I ended up making it about 10 times more horrifying and visceral than if they were just, being slit and blood came out. They're like, oh my god, or I was like, yeah, it's like sawdust pouring right out of their stomach. At one point, the thief went for a backstab, putting their dagger right in the back of the spine and just sort of pulling their knife down. And I kind of described it as like a bag of rice almost, as like these sort of grainy, clumpy pieces of pollen and weird nature debris sort of came out of this creature and just started pouring out. And they're like, oh god, I hate this. So it was a really, really fun kind of ending where they fought these weird cultists that had flowers sprouting out of their eye sockets and pollen coming out of their body whenever they were attacked. And it was just a, really disturbing but fun time. They gained the magical item they were looking for, and they went on their way excited for the next adventure. And honestly, it ran really well. There were basically no hiccups. There's the usual confusion you get with anybody running a game where, they're not sure about certain rules. They're, a little bit confused about certain meanings and, all sorts of stuff like that that like just isn't even things that is exclusive to, younger players, but just players in general who are not used to, some of the lingo or some of the things that you get used to as somebody who plays the hobby for a while. But yeah, it was great. I think Shadowdark was honestly a fantastic pick for it. If I was to run this again, I think I'd do Shadowdark again, honestly. I had such a blast. This was, I believe, my second or third time running Shadowdark, and I had so much fun with it. We did do the torch mechanic, but like it didn't come up that much because we weren't in the actual temple all that long. But everybody had a really, really fun time. And honestly, it's really great playing with kids because they have some crazy ideas. They have some really fun creativity. They have so much expression to anything going on that's really fun as a GM. They just have a really good time with it. One part I forgot to mention is that After session 0, the next morning, I went over to the cabin, and they were drawing their characters, and it was so cute, and their art was amazing. It's better than anything I've ever drawn in my life or will ever draw in my life. And I was like, oh my god, okay, you guys are really into this. This is awesome. I'm so excited to run this game for you guys. So it was really cute and that sort of thing. One thing that was also really cute was, my dad doesn't play tabletop RPGs. And the last time he did play one was in college, like 30 years ago or so, It had been a while since he had, played a tabletop RPG. And the next day in the car, he was just talking to me about it. He had so much fun. It was like, reliving, part of his past that had been gone for so long. But anyway, I absolutely recommend running Shadowdark for kids. I had a fantastic time. They had a fantastic time. It was just really great. I don't know. It was a really great experience. And I think if you have a chance, if you have any younger relatives, I think it's great to corrupt and indoctrinate them into this hobby and make them huge turbo nerds who will, never recover from the horrible hobby that you put them through. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you want videos but not the podcast a day early, consider joining the Patreon. You also get to sometimes vote on videos that will be up and coming. You also get, a nice purple roll in Discord and access to the secret channel, and I believe a few other things like updates and all that sort of stuff. So if you are interested in supporting the channel, consider becoming a patron. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a good one. Stay safe out there.